welcome everybody to this session. Really looking forward to hearing what our expert panel have got to share with you. Data analytics really wasn't on my radar up to, I guess, about 2 years ago. And I think it's just extraordinary to see how in the interim, it's gone from being a sort of quirky activity practiced by a few technically minded enthusiasts to what it is today, which I think is really a key capability for any organization who want to be seen as serious about their major projects. So we've got a short series of presentations for you and then a Q&A session. And when we get to the Q&A session, I'll ask you to, I'll pick somebody's question and I'll ask you to ask it out loud. So you can turn on your microphone and your video when I do that. And if you'd post your questions in the chat and we'll pick them up from there. Good, anything else? Yeah, we're recording the session today. So if you don't want to appear in the recording, then let me know when you ask a question and I won't ask you to appear on the video. I think before I get underway with the presentations, I'll ask anybody who isn't a presenter to turn off your microphone or to mute your microphone and turn off your camera. And I'll just introduce our speakers and I'll do that by asking each of you the same question, which is, what does data analytics mean to you? And let me start with you, Helen. Do you want to let us know your thoughts on that?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So I'd interpret that question as being able to visualize and interpret data so that you can make informed decisions.
I should have asked you to introduce yourself as well, Helen. So forgive me, please do introduce yourself.
No worries. Hi, I'm Helen King. I'm the head of BI reporting at Network Rail.
Great, thank you. James, do you want to go next?
Yes. Well, Helen slightly stole my answer, to be honest, which maybe is a good thing that we're all thinking the same sort of thing. But so I'm James Pavour. I'm an associate director at Mace, and I also currently lead the reporting for the Houston HS2 major program as well. I mean, data analytics to me is absolutely the giving our teams the ability to make informed decisions. I think above all else, there's a huge amount that goes into that. But that's the crux of it for me.
Thank you, James. Yeah, okay. Naomi, over to you.
I am Naomi Brooks. I am the Professor of Complex Programme Management at WMG University of Warwick. And product data analytics means to me sifting usefulness from hype or fortune and glory, depending which way you're looking at it.
Or both. Yes. Yes. Yeah, great. Thank you, Naomi. And Richard.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm Richard Corderoy. I'm the Managing Director of the Oakland Group. I'm here though really because of my interest in the world of data analytics. And actually I'm going to have a slightly controversial answer in that it doesn't really mean anything to me. All of this is about how ultimately can we use it as just another tool in the toolbox to deliver better outcomes for our projects and our stakeholders. So it's not a thing, it's just a means to an end.
We're going to start with the first of our presentations now. And it's Helen who's going to kick off. And she's going to take you through her experience of reporting and data analytics and the story of how Network Rail have applied this practically over the years. So Helen, over to you.
I wanted to tell you about my personal experience with data and analytics and then also how Network Rail have applied it. So I'm going to take you back 10 years. So 10 years ago, I joined Network Rail as an accountant, but my customer base was capital projects. So it's been numerous names over the 10 years, but it was all the major projects that do big enhancements on the railway and the bigger renewals work like track and signalling projects. And back then, we were lucky to get our hands on data, if I'm perfectly honest. So sorry, I'm just trying to get my cursor to work. So the objective then was how do we get data that we can look at, use in BAU, try and inform decisions, do our monthly reporting. And there was a project set up back then which basically built a data warehouse, and that kind of pulled multiple project management systems together. So you had stuff like financials, risk management, planning data, and what it allowed us to do was then look at your projects, extract the data, and start using that as like a business process. The outcomes of that was really the behavioural change of how do we get people to put data into systems correctly. And I think that was the biggest outcome, because if we hadn't have done that today, if we hadn't have done that back then, I don't think we would be where we are today. And it really helped with engaging with regulators and people outside Network Rail. So then 5 years ago, we had a director that was keen in data analytics. For these things, you need to have a bit of cash behind you as well, so he was willing to put a bit of investment in there. And the whole idea was that if we had performance scorecards, then could we have something whereby you could have one system with all our performance KPIs and be able to see parts of the business and compare them? Could you drill down and see which projects made them up? So we set off on a big project back then to make that happen, essentially. The way we did that was we had to expand the data out in our data warehouse. We had to make sure that we had all these KPIs and benchmarking comparable across the business. So somebody was submitting safety data, it was the same wherever it came from, therefore the system should be doing it in the same way. And we managed to basically develop a balanced scorecard with the relevant KPIs to drill down on that. And the outcomes of that was, thinking back 5 years ago, it was quite good for the time, even though it wasn't that long ago, but we were able to stand up in meeting rooms and have whiteboards whereby you could, instead of connecting a PowerPoint, you had a system you could log into, drill down and get answers there in the meeting rather than kind of having actions to go and follow that up. And that again improved data. So because we had senior leaders behind it, they wanted to kind of make sure that their areas were showing the right data in those systems, therefore we had better data quality. Then if we take you back to the last 18 months, it's kind of advanced again since then. So we've now started looking into all that data we've had for 10 years to see how can we apply machine learning models, advanced analytics, to be able to use that data as an asset. And the kind of things we've done is set up some better infrastructure. We use Azure now, and all the kind of applications Microsoft have got on offer where we can use machine learning techniques and predictive analytics to model data. And the outcomes we've had so far is a forecasting accuracy model that we've built that can be used in the financial planning processes. So basically it's a computer says this is what a project's going to perform at, and we can use that for benchmarking how project managers are interpreting forecasts in their financial systems. And then we've also had features like project insights, which is things kind of used for compliance. So we can say, well, if you look at a project, its financials, where is it in its milestones, is that actually something we should be closing out, and can we release the contingency funds or the risk against that, and make better decisions rather than sitting and leaving projects in systems open and reviewing them every month. that's kind of our journey. Hope that makes sense and add some value to what you do in your day jobs.
Thanks, Helen. That was fantastic. I'm going to move on to our next speaker now, who is James Pavour, and James is going to run through a few of the key lessons he's learnt on the practical applications of data analytics with some of the UK's most prominent infrastructure projects.
I'm James. I've been working now as an associate director for Mace, as I previously mentioned, now working on the HS2 Euston major program as their kind of program lead on reporting. And prior to that, I worked at Heathrow, on Heathrow expansion at Heathrow as their performance lead there, and also the head of their enterprise PMO. And prior to that, I also worked on the Network Rail Crossrail major program and worked to close that program out, and worked in a much more of a kind of reporting and sponsorship capacity. So Helen, I completely agree with the power of what you presented in terms of Network Rail. They have some fantastic tools over there when I was there a few years ago, and I can only imagine what you've got now. But I wanted to run you through a few kind of key lessons that I've learned from my own experience, and it kind of really focuses around four areas really. The first is around just purely the prioritization of the data that we actually look to use. Ultimately, we are collecting data and gathering it together, manipulating it and presenting it to people to be able to answer questions and to be able to give them information that they needed in order to be able to deliver their project effectively. And sometimes we lose sight of that, I think, in terms of the data sets that we can collect. They're almost, I kind of compare them to your old garden shed out the back, where you kind of start off with the best intentions, you start laying things out in the right order, and you want to keep it nice and neat and tidy. And then maybe a year or two down the line, you're starting to collect things in there and put things in maybe the back of the shed that you never really use again, or you might hope that you'd use one day in the future, and it ends up sticking in there. And to be honest with you, a lot of data sets and reporting is very similar. We end up reporting on a huge amount of data in our major programs purely because there's a lot of data to be had. And that doesn't necessarily mean we should be reporting on all of it. And it actually takes up a huge amount of time and effort in order to be able to do that as well. So one thing, if anything, that I would say to all of you on the call is, if you're doing some form of reporting in your project, really take a critical look at what it is that the data that you're collecting and the reports that you produce, because I'm sure that you can, with a critical eye, be able to take some of that out and actually alleviate some of the teams. A lot of the teams that we have in major programs, particularly data analysts, are more data handlers than data analysts. Their time is spent managing huge Excel sheets and then trying to bring them together. Some of them don't have the benefit of what Helen was describing, and so the real value that those people can bring is often missed purely because they're having to just handle data and not actually analyze it. The second point that I really thought was relevant for this was that you need to be able to establish a single source of truth. And what I mean by that is a single source of a controlled truth for each of your data streams. So once you've identified what the questions are that you're looking to answer, how are you going to answer them, and what's the data that you're going to collect to be able to answer them, and is it controlled? So a key example of this for me was in the Network Rail Crossrail major program, where we were looking to close out a major program of a couple of £1 billion by a specific deadline. And we basically needed to make sure that our strategy and our plan was informed by all of the projects that sit underneath it. And we thought we'd done a fairly good job of that in the central team. And when we came to start reviewing the progress of each of the project teams about how they were getting on, we started to notice a lot of the updates and data didn't match any of what we in the central team assumed it to be. And actually that was because a lot of the project managers on the ground were using the tools available to them in terms of Excel sheets to be able to manage a project plan, and they were changing that plan, and it was starting to diverge from what we had planned out. And so that stream of data that they were constantly using to inform themselves just completely did not mirror what the image of how we assumed that the project was running. And that's not, I don't think, unique to Network Rail Crossrail. But what we did in that circumstance was, with a little bit of encouragement, moved our project managers into using our planning systems, making sure that the data that they're putting in there is controlled and recognised by the whole project team, not just by them. And through doing that, you really then can drive a whole integrated system. You can understand how where resources need to be put, where things are lagging behind, where more support might need to be placed. And that was a really powerful tool for us to just be able to put that level of control in there that didn't exist previously, and meant that actually we were able to successfully close out that program, when otherwise I don't think we would have been able to if we were spending our time arguing around what the dates were, what dates belong to whom, and actually not what the dates were telling us and what we needed to do to act upon them. The second point that I included there as well is I think it's just really important at the very start of the project, if you can, to establish a common language and a common work breakdown structure. So making sure that different departments, different functions actually speak to each other in the same language can be really important. Often you'll have functions like cost, controls, commercial and finance, which all deal with numbers, and yet they all deal with numbers in very different ways. They all have different ways of describing the numbers and what they relate to, what assets they relate to, and this can be exceptionally confusing when you get to month end, particularly and you're trying to wrap all of this data together to provide to your leadership teams. And it's an absolute nightmare. It takes hours and hours of people's time and valuable people's time to be able to do that, and where it could be solved potentially through common languages and common work breakdown structure. The third point that then I really want to come on to is stakeholders. So stakeholders are absolutely your customers, and you need to be able to understand that those recipients of your data, they need to be able to use your data in a practical setting and be able to understand what the data is telling them. So you need really be able to get your analysts, if there's any leaders on the call, or if you're an analyst yourself, be able to get into the meetings where your data is being used in a practical setting to understand how people interact with that data, what are they focusing on. Drawing back to the first point that I made, is there any data that they don't use, and why don't they use it? Is it because it's not valuable data, because it doesn't answer the questions, or is it not presented in the right format? The best insight that I've ever had from my time on projects is actually being able to sit in meetings where my data is being used, and it has improved my capability as a data manager, as a data analyst, and certainly as a reporting lead to be able to understand how the data is effectively being used in the meeting. And it's also pushed me to deliver better quality reporting as well. So understanding where things haven't been presented particularly well in Excel, which is a common one, and people like to use Excel, but it's not really a data presentation tool, I would argue. There's much better ways of presenting data, and look to take cues really from other industries. So I particularly look at marketing, advertising, all of those kind of industries which are based around correctly kind of perceiving and communicating information, which is the word I was looking for, and they do that effectively. And there's a reason why that they do that effectively. And when you start to look at the reports that they produce, when you start to look at the adverts they produce, you can start to understand how the human brain starts to interpret data. So it's really important not to kind of silo yourself into this Excel mentality. And then finally, evidence-based decision making. Be a critical friend. I think this is really, really important. It probably points to that hippo kind of ignoring what his team are telling him in the right-hand corner there. It's really important that you support and challenge your project teams with the data that you produce. Don't just produce the data that somebody wants to see. It's actually can be even more kind of valuable to the team to present data which might challenge them in certain ways, to highlight certain issues that they might otherwise want to gloss over in some cases, or they might not be aware of because of the format of the reporting that you're delivering. So please make sure that you try and challenge your teams with the data that you produce. I saw an interesting study a while ago that suggested that co-pilots in simulators would rather actually virtually die than present their captains with certain data, purely because of the fact that they were worried around the hierarchy and the power structures of that cockpit. Likewise, there's been incidents where surgeons have worked on the wrong body part purely because junior surgeons who were witnessing them weren't willing to kind of stand up and present the correct data, if you like, to them to inform that decision. So really important. I've probably spoken for long enough now, Jonathan. I'm not sure how much time I've got left, but all I would say is once you've kind of captured those core steps, really the next step for data analytics, and probably what Helen moved on to, and what Naomi is about to talk about in machine learning, is actually looking at the forecasting capability of data, not just being able to tell where you've been, but actually where you're potentially going, and the decisions that can then inform is really the next step, I think, for us within the infrastructure industry, at least.
Great, thank you ever so much, James. I that was fascinating. As you were talking, I was making notes, and I kind of had this amazing vision of a shared language, and actually everybody being on the same page, so that when you move from one project to another, you don't have to go through this whole process of what language do you speak.
Yes.
We can actually just work together and flow data. So maybe data could be a way of creating a common bridge between different project cultures and different project languages, if you like. But anyway, good, excellent. Right, I'm going to move you on to our third speaker now, which is Naomi, and Naomi's going to tell us everything, or to tell you everything you wanted to know about machine learning to predict project performance, but we're afraid to ask. So Naomi, over to you.
Well, we're not going to quite cover everything, but we're going to have a go. And I'm going to apologise to perhaps the 75% of the audience who know exactly how machine learning predicts project performance, and therefore will find the next 10 minutes quite boring. But you're going to have to bear with me and the 25% who really don't. So that's what we're about, actually trying to understand what project performance what machine learning can do in prediction and project performance. And I've subtitled this presentation, "The Stupidity of Machine Learning," which might give you some idea of where I'm going to take this. Just a tiny bit more of an explanation about who I am. I run a group at Warwick University called Project Praxis. We've only just set up. We aim to look at oven-ready research. We're doing lots of work already in complexity at Sellafield, agility with JLR, and a lot on project data analytics, both in terms of hard machine learning algorithms, what works where, and soft barriers and enablers. My background for the past 10 years has been complex infrastructure delivery. So I was the director of the European Construction Institute. I did a big European funded project called Mega Project, which brought together over 90 researchers from across Europe. We fed our findings on best practice there to people like European Investment Bank, World Economic Forum, etc., etc. Before that, I was an aerospace engineer, actually. So there you go. And at WMG, I think I really ought to point out that we have a capability in developing delivery capability at every level, from degree apprenticeships through to PhDs through to executive development. So if you're interested in any of that, please do contact me and get in touch. So what exactly am I going to do? Clearly and succinctly, I hope, I'm going to tell you what machine learning is and what it isn't. And I'm going to discuss how it can actually help and how it can't in predicting project performance. So, machine learning. Machine learning is not the same as artificial intelligence. There's no IEE standard definitions in these areas, by the way, anyway. So when I say that, I'm just, using pure professorial authority. We can't just call upon something that gives that kind of justification, but we have an accepted terminology. Artificial intelligence is something actually much bigger than that. Artificial intelligence actually takes in information readings from the real world, processes it, understands it, and then sends signals back out to the real world to make it different. So that's a huge activity, and quite frankly, one which I think we're going to be a long time before we see really in evidence in projects. Machine learning is the kernel within that. It is the clever bit, or as clever as far as it goes, because it's the algorithms that do the learning. And despite very complex names, like support vector machine algorithms and random forest algorithms, and if anybody wants to explain random forest algorithms to me, please feel free at this moment, Machine learning is based on some really simple ideas. A really simple idea, actually, pattern spotting. So it looks at what's happened in the past and uses this to predict the future. It is just programming. So it's about how to program. I did once, very, many moons ago, program in C++. It's that kind of thing. Mostly often uses a language called Python, and Python is free and comes with ready-made algorithms that you can use. So your actual machine learning bit, the kernel, all of this inside this really complex system of data manipulation is almost like open source. So it's there. And it's virtually just statistics. So the kind of activity it's doing is the kind of thing you're doing when you're looking for statistical relationships. But statistical programming doesn't sound as good as machine learning, does it? So that's the kind of background of what we're looking at. So what I want to do now is actually just take you through a really kind of simple example of what machine learning is doing, hopefully to give a little bit more insight into its activities. So, very simplified example, but hopefully gives you a general gist. Right, we want to know, don't we, whether or not our project is going to be a success. So what we could do is we could take a whole series of projects about which we have some data on their characteristics, and we know whether or not they were a success or failure. And we can try and see amongst those characteristics if we can spot a pattern, which will reliably predict whether it's going to be a success or a failure. Now, there's a pattern here, ladies and gentlemen, amongst this information, but I'm guessing that it's going to take you a while to spot it. And I think if we had the kind of number of projects that are going on within your organisation, hundreds, thousands, and the hundreds or thousands of characteristics that if you have a really snazzy, beautiful cloud-based system which enables you to bring together in one single source of truth, access to everything you've got, quite a few characteristics, maybe hundreds of characteristics. So if you're finding it difficult to spot it there, imagine how difficult it would be if you're trying to do it in the context of a real project or program or portfolio. So machine learning is great because it will spot that for you. So it'll go through and say, oh, where is the success in this? Using vast amount of algorithms, some of which I understand and some of which I don't. All with different characteristics. And a lot of my research actually is about what's the best characteristic, what is the best algorithm for what kind of data you're throwing in there. So machine learning will quite quickly come up with this, if I can find there we go, right. So it will find the pattern. It will find that if you have this characteristic and this characteristic, in conjunction, you'll get success. But if you don't have that one, or there's another combination, you won't. So, boy, we suddenly have a predictive capability, something that we've wanted forever in project control and project delivery. We're going to know whether this thing is going to work or not. That's what everybody wants. I think, we've got a really interesting event coming up next week. Thank you, Oakland, for sponsoring it, looking at barriers and enablers of project data analytics. And everybody we've talked to so far is really interested in this prediction facility. So it should be easy, shouldn't it? But it isn't. So this is where the reality and perhaps the stupidity of machine learning comes in. Because first of all, and we've talked about this a lot already today, there's the whole issues of data quality. So if you've got a load of rubbish here, you're not going to be able to predict anything. And rubbish isn't, quality isn't guaranteed just because you've got seamlessly and beautifully integrated systems. Quality is guaranteed by what Helen was talking about, was the motivation to put the right thing in at the right point anyway. And you can have missing values here, weird distributions, and you're in classic garbage in, garbage out territory. Secondly, characteristics. So these things along the top. Machine learning is stupid because it can only look at what you've asked it to. Now that might be vast, given the vast amount of characteristics that will be contained and accessible to it once you've got your data together, but you still might be missing the key one. If we look at APM's conditions for project success, they say things like effective governance, commitment to project success, capable sponsors. Try to imagine how difficult it is to operationalize those in terms of characteristics. So the whole issue of characteristics itself is difficult. Then performance. Can you express performance in a clear way? Well, if we talk about project success, we could now have the seminar and 20 more talking about project success, even if we make that tighter to cost. I mean, I've written a whole Institute of Civil Engineer paper on what is a cost overrun. So even cost is not a universally accredited measure then. So we've got to think really carefully about those performance measures. And finally, and crucially, is this project that we want to do now similar enough to the other ones for this learning to apply? So this is historic, this is future. Has something happened? Is this project different, or has something happened? Have we just had a COVID pandemic that makes anything that we gathered in terms of historic learning relevant still? Now, having pointed out all the ways in which machine learning is stupid, I'm actually going to, I'm going to confound the issue once more, I think, actually, with this slide, because I love it. There's Benjamin Disraeli, Queen Victoria's favourite Prime Minister. That's apropos of nothing whatsoever. And some people think Mark Twain said this. No, he was quoting Disraeli. Let's amend that well-known adage to: there are four kinds of lies: lies, damn lies, and statistics, and machine learning models. And the reason I put this here is because it is always possible to get a wonderfully matching predictive model on the basis of the data you've got. The real question is if you can use it for anything else. So that's something I think you need to be very aware of when someone's coming to you and saying, hey, I've just done this model and it's got 98.7% predictability. You really need to quiz that question. Am I a cynic though, after all of this? Absolutely not, because I have used machine learning myself and seen it used in other ways in project delivery to yield really useful insights. So perhaps if I just finish, Jonathan, with this, and you'll be probably quite glad because I'm looking at you to see whether or not my 10 minutes are up yet. Now there's a thumb up. I don't know whether that means it's up or whether I'm good to go. But anyway, right. So finally, machine learning prediction can be worthwhile in project delivery. So in my experience of using this alone then, we've highlighted cause of cost and schedule over in this data set of European mega projects and mega projects itself. And we found a really interesting finding that special purpose entity governance meant an increase in schedule and cost adherence, which nobody would have predicted, nobody would have recognised beforehand and was useful. We did identifying the drivers of cost in nuclear decommissioning projects and found that it was space around decommissioning site, which was a good predictor. We've been very recently identifying the predictors of good schedule estimates in multinational corporation manufacturing organisations, and we found a real relationship in predictive capability and focus. So how few actually projects you give your project manager, and specific locations where those are undertaken. And this one isn't mine, actually, this is Richard's. He's about to speak next, so he could tell you more about this. But machine learning has been really well used to predict underspend in capital delivery projects. So that's a really useful example of where machine learning prediction is used. So really, the answer is just be realistic. Know what machine learning is, what it can and can't do. And if you're interested about finding out any more about the research we're doing, or in machine learning in particular, or more widely, or any of our training and executive development opportunities, please do contact me. Thank you very much indeed, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you ever so much, Naomi. That was great. I've got loads of questions and I won't be able to ask them all because I need to allow other people to ask their questions. But that was fantastic. Good. We come to our final speaker here, and picking up on what Naomi was just saying about success factors, I found that the best success factor for a webinar like this is to have a variety of imaginative and very different perspectives from different speakers, and then have somebody amazing to come along at the end and just tie it all together, which is essentially Richard Corderoy's challenge.
I don't quite know where to go with that introduction, other than you may be disappointed with your forecasting, I suppose, is given what we've just heard. Look, I think we've heard, actually, it's, across Helen, James, Naomi, three really interesting perspectives, actually complementary. My takeaway, Helen, is actually it's been a really long journey. NR didn't just decide to click his fingers, and 6 months later was, you can see the roots of this 10 years ago. James actually talked about kind of the breadth of things you have to worry about and things you want to pull together to sort of start to make it work. And Naomi, yes, a healthy skepticism of, funnily enough, we are a long way, I believe, from the bot that is going to run the project and just tell us what to do, and we can all sit back and drink coffee or whatever. But yeah, I'm going to try and draw it together. And just to declare my hand, I'm managing director of the Oakland Group. We're a operational improvement consultancy of 35 odd years. And over the last 5 or 6, we've really got into the world of data. And funnily enough, our view is it's just another part of the toolbox that you can't run a business without these days. My history, though, is I started my career in the dockyards of Scotland, in Mace, bringing a very elderly submarine, I think is the polite name, out of a refit. And it was the classic project, actually relatively little data. By the time I got there, the whatever it was, £80 million refit was costing well north of 100 million, and kind of we'd got to the we're nearly there yet school of project management. It really was kind of perhaps not the greatest moment, but it did kind of perhaps knock the corners off my ivory tower, and give me a good insight into the real world of this sort of thing. Because you can have all the planning in the world, but actually what you can't plan for is a shoal of 1 million fish swimming into one of the dockyard ponds and making all the water toxic for 6 months as they all promptly died. What do you do with that when you're trying to plan a project? It's just, how do you account for that? And so really that school of hard knocks has stayed with me kind of for the rest of my career. Now, what I was going to sort of focus on a little bit over the next 5 or 6 minutes was actually the mechanics of this are difficult. But let's take a step back and just look at where the industry is, where we all are as a community in terms of this journey into data analytics. Because I think it's a really interesting story. There are those, and I'm guessing most of the people on this call, who are quite into it and see it. And actually some would go, well, at the very least, data analytics is a no-brainer. May or may not be convinced of how far you can go into the statistics and machine learning. But surely, having a single source of truth and the data coming together and being able to make good data-led decisions is a good thing. From some of the people we talk to, making that assumption that everyone in the business thinks like that is bold. The hippos are alive and well, and not necessarily they feel threatened, but they've got to where they've got to by running big projects and big programs on their instincts and with the sort of data that they get today. And actually, it's a really big shift to go beyond that into something new. And actually, when you look at making that shift, it's quite hard. You talk to a company, well, why do you want to do machine learning? Or why do you want to use advanced data? And well, because we think it's going to save costs and time. Okay, well, specifically, what do you want to do? Is it reporting? Is it assurance? If it's forecasting, what do you want to forecast? Yeah, okay, whether we're going to build the power station on time is a great, but is there anything particular in there that you want to go on first? And it's amazing the number of organizations that very quickly you move beyond the hype and, well, actually, we don't really know. And we don't know partly because we haven't thought about it, but partly because we're at the foothills of this stuff and we don't know the art of the possible yet. Likewise, to Helen's early point, actually, around, we talk about data quality a lot. Everyone goes, well, data quality is rubbish. You go, well, let's unpack that. Is your data quality rubbish? Is that because your systems are corrupting it, or you're not capturing it, or it's all in spreadsheets? Or is it actually that your business processes don't necessarily get complied with, or everyone's definition of how they're complied with are different everywhere? And actually, you go to many organizations and there's a menagerie of systems and a menagerie of the ways that they work and are used. And actually, that's really hard work to pull that together. Now, when I was in my dockyard, engineering equaled bloke or lady with a spanner. But obviously, in this context, we mean data engineering. And to Naomi's point, how do you get that little table of noughts and ones? How do you build that table in the first place? We can all, everyone here could go online, take a Udemy course on how to do machine learning, and within 24 hours be building models on something. But the hard bit is, how do you get the data organized in a way that actually lets you build those models? And how do you actually work out what data is valid, what data is comparable? To Naomi's point, you may have thousands of projects, but how many power stations a year do you actually build? How many bridges a year do you actually build? How do you compare, compared to consumer machine learning, when you might have millions of transactions or billions of transactions in Amazon? And how do you bring that back when actually you don't build very much of anything in the sort of size of projects we're talking about? And then finally, how do you bring those benefits and roll them back out into the organization? And yes, we're now into good old change management. A clever dashboard doesn't do anything. It only does something when someone makes a different decision or behaves differently as a result of it. So how do you bring that back into the business? And given the scale of the change that we're talking about, how do you do that in a way which isn't, how do you eat that elephant in the room? I know it's a sort of trite saying, but, hi, boss, we've got to change everything everywhere. Our processes, our data, our systems, how we report it, the tools we want to do, how we operate it. And it'd actually be quite nice if we could change the entire supply chain as well, so they did it our way. And it'd be nice if the customers joined in too. That's a wonderful aspiration, but, with vanishingly few exceptions, and perhaps the HS2s of the world are one of the few places where actually they can mandate it to that level. We've got to work with the brownfield site we're in. So how do you get started, get things done in a way that is sustainable and can be taken forward from the business? Likewise, how do you do that in a way that doesn't result in the dreaded proof of concept phrase, I'm guilty of this? And those that have worked with me will smile. But, I talked to a client the other week who had 400 proof of concepts running, each independent, each in its own Bible, its own environment, putting its own set of data to its own thing, doing whatever. IT will pull their hair out of that. So how do you deploy and make this work in a way that actually, as you build stuff, as you eat that elephant, you can put things back together and it becomes part of a sustainable whole? So I've asked a lot of questions there because I don't think you can answer that question in 9 minutes. The good news is I think there are lots of organizations who are starting to pick at the edges of this, and some that are starting to pick at all of it kind of in the right way up front. And so that's really encouraging. But I think, one of the greatest mistakes we could make as a community of people who are interested would be to make too many assumptions around our collective starting points, because I think it is very different, and the answers therefore are quite different by industry, by company, by the types of projects and the like we are working on. So I don't know if that sums it up, whether that was just my rant on top, but either way, back to you to sort of direct traffic for the Q&A part.
I think I'll pick up on that last where you finished, Richard, and this idea of different speeds. I think most organizations will have some kind of mix of maturities. As you say, there'll be some people who get this, who understand this, and they're doing great stuff. And there may be other teams, other divisions, other projects who really have no inkling. So how do you manage these different streams, these different levels of maturity? Do you hold some people back? Do you beat everybody else over the head until they comply and follow the one best way with their data, or do you try and kind of run with ride your chariot with 7 different horses and manage these different speeds and this kind of mixed economy? Richard, do you want to start with that one, and then I'll invite anyone else in the panel to respond.
As with the best politician's answer, I think it depends, which is probably very unsatisfactory. I think, if you've got the mandate and the will and the funding, you can go down the big bang approach. I think, to a degree, Network Rail had that opportunity, had good foundations and a really strong leadership team that wanted to go down that. I'm sure Helen will say more. I do think other organisations, you do have to, you have to provide the road for the chariot and provide some guidelines for it to go down. But certainly, whilst you're really in these early days, you have to accept that you've got to let the enthusiastic people get on with it, stop them from doing anything that drives completely off piste, and continue to make the case so the rest of the business kicks up. I think it's true of all organisations, but particularly the project community, where thou shalt mandates don't seem to go down very well, and hence the carrot is probably more powerful than the stick.
Anybody else in the panel want to pick up on that? Naomi, you're waving your finger at me, so do please jump in.
Yes, indeed. I would just like to say that we here at Project Praxis WMG have been working with a APM on a data maturity tool. And I think that's very useful, because one of the first things, if you have got disparate maturity that you want to cope with, either across organisations or within organisations, is actually to be able to demonstrate that. So we're working on that now. And if anybody wants to be a trial user of that, please contact me at the email message that I have already put out, which is naomi.brooks@warwick.ac.uk.
Excellent. Thank you.
Give the advertisement.
That's all right. No, you're a panelist. You're allowed to advertise. That's very good. That was tremendous. I almost feel we should have a competition for the best analogy for data analytics, and I think the kind of Ben-Hur analogy is I'm liking that at the moment. So I'm going to now turn to some of the audience Q&A, and I will ask you, those of you that would like to, when I identify your question, if you'd like to turn on your microphone and ask it direct of the panel. So the first one I was going to ask is the first question in the list, which is from Reg Fernandez. And Reg talks about AI and the dangers of incorrect information or incorrect data, which I know we've touched on. But Reg, do you want to just share your question with the panel?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, indeed.
Sorry, I switched off my microphone. I prepare business cases, and more importantly, the bit I really enjoy is justifying the benefits. Now, one thing that comes across in a lot of transformation programs is how companies are using data, improving data analytics, and now we have AI, and like it's the best thing on earth, and I'm sure it is. But I'm deeply worried after the last scandal in the educational sector. What are the dangers of getting it wrong? And if we leave it up to the machines to predict everything, what safeguards do we have for making sure we don't end up pressing the red button, if you like?
Fantastic, thanks, Rich. So who wants to tackle that? Come on, panel. Oh, Naomi, yes.
I'll have a go. I'm very brave, Reg. I'll take that one on. I think you've got 2 issues going on, what you're talking about there. One is this idea of benefits and justification of benefits, and then this idea of safeguards. And I think justifying benefits and AI being the best thing ever, I'd almost go back in history and say, have we ever managed to actually financially justify an ERP system? I mean, it's fraught, isn't it? And sometimes you just do things because you think it's the right thing to do, and that's because it is the right thing to do. In terms of safeguards, yeah, and I think Ian Heptonstall in the chat was also talking about this, is this idea of the fact that we are almost ceding power to machine learning. We are giving it the ability to predict, and that's a really interesting point, actually. And I've been doing a lot of work with a fantastic woman in our statistics and data analytics department called Julia Brettschneider, because the world of data science now is taking machine learning very seriously and the ethical implications of that very seriously. And I think when we really get to grips with it in project delivery, we've got to have algorithms that we can understand. So this machine learning will come up and say it's 2.6 of this, 3 of that, and the log of 6 of the other. And then you've got a model. And we need to say, well, why is that? And I think that questioning, that sensible questioning, and also having even a naive understanding of how it works is what's going to save us from doing something very stupid and the red button being pressed.
Great, thank you. Excellent, good. I'm going to move on to another question now. And this one, forgive me, it's from Kogila Balakrishnan. Yes, I probably massacred your name, Kogila, in which case I do apologize. But you've got a question about Network Rail and the challenges of migrating to a data management approach, which I guess is aimed at Helen. So Kogila, would you like to ask your question of Helen? Okay.
Want me to go ahead with?
Yeah, do. You can see the
response?
question in the
Yeah.
chat there, Helen. So would you like to respond?
Sure, yeah. I think both James and Richard covered this. It's about having one source of the truth to start with. What data is correct in your business, and then how do you go about getting a process to capture that data to make sure it's complete, so you've got everything that you want in terms of collecting, and then how do you make sure, if you're going to be comparing projects and all that kind of stuff, how do you make sure everyone's doing the same thing? In our organisation, we just focused on the major systems that were already in place that had the governance around them, were working to start with, and we went on from there. There's always somebody that comes to you with a spreadsheet that they do in the background, and sometimes it's hard. No, it doesn't fit unless you get a proper solution in place and everyone's doing the same thing. Then we'll incorporate it into our data analytics, and then I guess if you're a smaller company, it's things like using SharePoint appropriately and trying to use the basic tools that are there in the right way, trying to get some control over your data capture. Yeah,
good point. I think a lot of organizations, they don't use the basic tools, or they don't use them correctly, which is part of the problem. Great, thank you, Helen. So I'm going to move on to a question.
Jonathan, can I just jump in there?
Oh, please do. Sorry, I should have invited the panel to.
No, but it's a really good point I think Helen makes, and so I agree with this is right and proper. We have an ethical debate about ML and AI and what it can do. Do you push the big red button? I think whilst that's a good debate to have, the actual immediate need is almost at completely the opposite end of maturity. It's, can we find small ways where these tools are going to help us? I think Helen's, even just in reporting land, how many of us genuinely understand the integrity of how the data gets from, a project office in a porter cabin on site or something similar, all the way back to the board pack at the end of the month. No ML, nothing clever. But actually, what is the integrity of that journey? Because we base very big decisions on that data today, or we rubbish it and then just do hippo thing. And so I agree there are some sort of really cerebral parts on the ML side of life, but I think we should apply that question to the way we use data in projects all over, because the number of times that the spreadsheet hits an air gap and someone does some manual adjustment or finessing, it may be well-intentioned, it may be required, it may just be a budgetary adjustment, and that kind of gets lost in the noise as that then moves up the line. So the caution of that integrity is really important.
So Richard, do you have a kind of stock, hang on, remind me, what are you trying to do question that you hit people with when they're getting carried away?
I wish I was that good. No, it is. It is. Could we recreate that number in a month's time? Do we actually know where it came from? And in general, if there's been a human being finessing it in a spreadsheet or making spreadsheet-based adjustments, a lot of caution is required, and that's just of reporting, let alone more advanced analytics, let alone AI and ML.
Great, thank you. Well, would any of the other members of the panel like to comment before I move on to another question?
I was just going to jump in there, Jonathan. I think from my experience, and it's around the quality and integrity of your data, something that's really important. If you can't kind of ensure that people are following the processes and the governance that you have in place, because everyone will know on projects that you have a set of processes. How often do people pick them up and look at them is maybe another question. Forcing people through a route of using systems is often quite a helpful way of doing that, because you can set the parameters through which people can enter data, and that ultimately that way the data is collated. So I've definitely found that introducing systems and approaches that encourage the use of data in a certain format to make sure that it's not manipulated can be helpful in that. It's not a golden bullet, but it can certainly kind of improve the quality of data and make sure that you're kind of founding your decisions on a solid basis. Great,
thanks, James. I'm going to move on now to a question from Sarah Coleman. Now, Sarah, you've asked 2 questions, so I'd ask you to choose one of your 2 questions. You can have either, but you can't have both.
Oh, thank you. I was being a little cheeky, Jonathan, so thank you. But it's actually interesting to hear the range of use of data analytics, so thank you for that. And I'm kind of, the bottom line I think I'm getting to at the moment is it's still fairly immature. So my question is about benefits realization, and I was wondering whether any of the work that you're doing at the moment within organizations or even at Warwick University, Naomi, might be about how you predict the success of benefits that you are identifying right up front in the business case.
Naomi, do you want to kick off with that first?
Okay, I think actually that success of benefits in the business case belongs to one of those questions which are really, really, really difficult to understand and to use predictively. So that's almost like off the scale of problematic when it comes to machine learning. And I think there are all sorts of questions I'd like to ask, and you will, Sarah, as a follow-up from that. In some ways, I'd actually almost like to challenge the initial proposition you put, though, in terms of maturity and levels of maturity. We did some work with a number of other universities, with Manchester, with Southampton, with Sheffield, looking at the way that project data analytics is used, and that ended up in a really useful APM report. And we came to the conclusion, actually, that you can split it in terms of descriptive and predictive, and within your own organisation and across organisations. And if you look at descriptive analytics within your own organisations, that actually should be accepted practice. There's nothing stopping you doing that. In other words, there's nothing left to learn. The tools are there. All you need is intent and this huge kind of commitment to getting your data in the right shape to do it. So I think when we're talking about maturity, that's there. There's a lot of people who are on that journey already and successfully using it in the field of descriptive analytics within their own organization. As soon as we move away from that in terms of trying to do comparisons across organizations descriptively, or trying to do prediction within your own organization, or God forbid, prediction across organizations, is where things start to get more problematic. So I think we can usefully learn loads from listening to James and Helen in terms of how to get a kind of basic analytic approach bought into and implemented within your organization. But we're still going to have to live a little bit to get those ideas of prediction, which I know everybody is really quite keen on.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Anyone else? James? Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. I think it is it's an absolutely part that we as an industry, I think, continue to push on and obviously get excited about when we hear things. And it's really good to hear people like Naomi actually bring us back down to reality in some cases. One thing that I would say is that it absolutely depends on the benefit that you're talking about. When you talk about cost in particular, that's something which we can all fairly well recognise, and there's systems and models in place to be able to predict cost. If you then try and bring in another kind of benefit to that same thinking, sometimes you can have some level of success. So an example I would use is something else which people are very keen on at the moment, is carbon. And actually, people are looking at carbon and understanding and putting it in their strategies. There's a lot of promotional kind of messaging out there about how we're going to net zero. I think pretty much every company you come across has signed themselves up to that and not necessarily have an idea about how they're going to achieve it or how they're going to measure it. And one concept that we definitely toyed with in some organisations, I know because we definitely used this in Heathrow when I was there, is actually treating carbon almost in the same way as cost and looking at how carbon is obviously measured, which can be quite difficult. But when you start to get a base level of measurement you can rely on, actually treating it in the same way as cost, modelling it in a similar fashion, but also actually basing your decisions on carbon as you would cost, which is actually a leap kind of from what anything has been done. So actually, when you're sitting down in a meeting, you stop, and I think you asked, have you got any key points throughout the project lifecycle? You stop for a minute and say, we're making decisions, we're changing the scope of what you're trying to produce here. The traditional answer would be, well, how much is it going to cost me, and how long is it going to take? But actually, how much carbon is it going to create? What's that going to impact on me? And when you compare, whenever it's analogous to cost, that tends to work quite well in people's minds because they're very really used to using that way of assessing things. So that's all my kind of pointer, if you like, is to look at things that are analogous to some of the measurements that you've already got in place.
Great, thanks, James. Richard or Helen, any comments, or shall I move on?
Well, only in that, if you're, in terms of the business case for making the investment to do more in this space is really hard. And so, to Naomi's point, it's a bit like the business case for email or an ERP system. It is really, really hard. And my only counsel is there is one set of business cases that go down there. Oh, look how much money we can save in reporting if we have all our sub people. And I don't really believe them. They don't save very much, and it's arms and fingers, and it's not a great business case. The best business cases are the ones where actually you pick something smaller than the holy grail, or are we going to do the project on time? And I think carbon might be a great example. Health and safety is another one. Of projects around congestion in the area around the site, something quite specific, and actually build a business case around that. And I think that will be more real and more believable than the computer's going to solve all our problems, because I think generally the project community is a pretty jaded lot and don't really buy that sort of argument.
Oh, goodness me. Gosh, it's just as well you're safely at the other side of a computer, Richard. They can't get at you because calling them jaded. Brave man.
Well, but I think that's because as a community, and I count myself as part of it, every 5 years there's another fad. We'll manage our projects like this and everything will be fine. We'll get this new bit of data and everything will be fine. We'll change the way we do risk management and we'll all be fine. And actually, it's never quite as simple as one thing.
Jaded is good. I think that's a great term, actually. I'm proud to call myself jaded. Cynical is where you should be at.
Yes. But being project professionals, don't think we can stop there. I think we should have levels of jaded. So we should. But anyway, let me move on to the next question. And I'm going to ask Ian Heptonstall to ask his question. Ian, you raised a question about expectations. It's quite a long question, so if you could ask it as succinctly as possible.
Thanks, Jonathan. Making a decision needs data, but we compare it with something we expect. We've got some sort of model that says we should be here, and our data says there. So the focus is on variance from our expectation. It's one thing to get the data on hand in real time. I'm just interested to see what the speakers are doing on the other side about the expectations. Are we comparing our data with the right thing? And do we know what the right lever is to pull to fix if there's a variance that needs fixing? So it's one thing to notice a variance, but we need to know how to drive this thing called projects. But what work's being done to sort of test the other side of the equation from data on how we could use it and how we can use it to improve the various theories and hypotheses that exist on what are the right levers to pull on projects, which I don't think as a community we've got any consistent view on at the moment. So is anybody bringing those two halves together is my question.
You want me to start with that one?
Please do. Yeah.
Because, you know, I'm going to say yes, of course, Ian. We are looking at that. I've just done a bit of research actually on how to use a research project funded by the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority on how to use machine learning in benchmarking. Because there are a whole host of issues, Ian, which probably sits slightly outside this. If you can remember when I put the grid up and then we came along with this new project and we said, how does this fit into the category anyway? I think we've been quite poor at articulating that. As a community, we've kind of said, oh yeah, we know what reference class forecasting is and we're doing it. And I'd contentiously say probably we don't. So there are some cases where it's really easy to do that in the context, say, of oil and gas, where you do have a lot of similar projects that you can actually compare. But when I think of trying to do it across more disparate situations, then what you compare it to, or whether you know whether you can compare what you want to with what's gone in the past, is something we do need to do more work on. What I would say, though, is that there's a virtuous circle that will be engendered. Because if we have good quality data, we will have good quality historic data. And therefore, it will be much easier to make good estimates of what we should be comparing with in the future.
Very good, thank you. Helen, I was going to draw you in at this moment because you know, Network Rail, like Highways England or Crossrail or TfL or other organisations that are regularly running projects, you must have this problem because you're regularly doing projects. So there must be a tendency to say, oh, this is like, oh, we've done one of these, this is like that, or this is like this. How do you address this question of kind of received expectations in terms of data?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, like you say, because when you're in the business, you do have set targets and that is what you need to meet and that's what everything is compared to. But yeah, better sharing of data, like with us having regulators, we're asked for a lot of data that is then sent and modelled together. So I guess it's all about better sharing within the wider company or industry to set benchmarks. All I can think of that we've done in Network Rail on the machine learning side is some forecasting accuracy work, but we just took projects that had similar characteristics. So they were the higher level of control projects that would allow comparability, and that then allows you to predict essentially a forecast that is similar to other projects in the wider business. I can't really think of anything else we've done in that space, to be honest.
Okay, thank you. We've only got a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to ask each of the panelists to respond to a question now, which is, what advice would you give to people starting their project analytics journey? And in terms of what would you definitely do again, and what would you never repeat? So Richard, would you like to kick that one off?
Yeah, and actually it's partly an answer to Ian's question. So I think the bit that I would encourage to do is for us all to educate ourselves. You know, lots of the questions we had of, you know, what happens if the machine presses the button, or we start comparing whatever it is, sharks and divorces in Florida, whatever the link is, if you follow it, you know, and actually that becomes that we, even if we're not going to be deeply technical people, need, you know, most of us can talk the language of construction or whatever type of projects is we manage, even if we're not, you know, deep engineers, and data is no different. We need to be able to challenge it, ask questions around it, and use it as just another input. I have experts in the room, I have data, I have my hippo. Who am I going to listen to, or how are we going to use it to get to the answer? And I think fundamentally that is the main part of grinding this out. And I suppose, you know, what wouldn't I do again is ever promise the box that just says do this, because I think a much longer conversation, but I think we are a million years away from that, purely because we don't actually capture the information you would need to make that decision anyway.
Thank you. James, do you want to kick in with your two pennyworth, as it were?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of what I would do, and certainly what I've learned, I think the most valuable practical application at least is small proofs of concept. Being able to put things, particularly in front of influential people who can potentially invest in what you're trying to do, through small proofs of concept that actually practically work, and building a bit of a groundswell around that has really been successful from my perspective. They don't need to be complex, but they do need to be effective. So that for me has been an absolute success. I think from a very simple perspective, what I wouldn't do again is basically be able to sit in a meeting where I know the validity of the data that we've been able to present and spent so hard working on has effectively been ignored and hasn't been given the kind of airtime that it needs to have. And that relates back to the hippo example that I gave. It can be, we talk about all of this fantastic work that's going, the amount of energy, value, you know, spend that goes into all of this work, and it can easily be completely ignored within an organization, very, very easily, no matter how much money you've thrown at it. So I would say that that's the biggest kind of lesson that I've learned, and something that I certainly stick by now, is making sure that the data has enough time and attention paid to it. Okay, good. Helen, I'm going to go to you and then to Naomi, and if you could be brief, because time's ticking away. We're in danger of overrunning.
Sure, yeah, I would agree with James. So I'd start small, something specific, maybe a specific area of a project, like planning or something like that. Obviously, if you've got directors that are going to invest, then it's going to help your journey and move you quicker. What I'd do differently is I'd probably think about data availability to people. So when we first started out, it was quite a slow progress where we were doing periodic reporting, and if you're working in projects, you want something now. So I'd probably put more effort into the frequency of data availability to people. Excellent, thank you. Naomi, what about you?
Well, I'm tempted to say, Jonathan, be jaded and cynical, but I'll paraphrase that actually by saying be realistic, but at the same time maintain some idealism and make sure that everybody in your organisation believes that the best way to make a decision is with good data.
Excellent, good. Well, thank you for that. I'm just going to thank all of the panelists. Have a look at some of the upcoming events that we've got over the next month or so. There's one particularly in July. We've got a webinar on the quest for net zero, using data leadership to achieve long-lasting social, economic and industrial change. So that's obviously picking up on the same point there. So if you go to the major projects and look at our majorprojects.org and look at our events program, you'll see that there. So again, thank you to all of the panelists. That was brilliant. It was really good. I was kind of thinking a bit like taskmaster, because in some ways data analytics feels like a taskmaster task, and ask you what have we learned. But I've learned a huge amount, and I hope the audience have as well. So thank you, the panelists, and thank you, the audience. And you'll be able to pick up the recording of this in a few days on the Major Projects Association website. So thank you all.
Thanks.